The year was 1887, and winter had crept early into Harrow's Crossing. The sky above the railway station was a flat iron gray. Wind threaded through every crack in the depot's siding, tugging at the hem of worn coats and carrying the dry hush of a town between seasons. Just across from the depot, an old white church stood hunched against the chill, its bell long silent and its door long closed. On its stone steps, facing the tracks, sat a woman. Her name was Iris Holloway. She had been there for 4 days. Same shawl, same small satchel pressed against her side. Same silence. Each day the trains came and went. Conductors shouted. Passengers bustled. None of it stirred her. She hadn't begged, hadn't asked for help, hadn't even asked for directions. The townspeople had seen her, of course. They always saw. The woman who arrived alone, stepping down from the eastbound train like she expected someone to be waiting. Who walked past the inn, past the store, straight to the church steps, and stopped. Now they whispered. One of those letter brides. The fella changed his mind. Or maybe he never wrote at all. Iris heard the whispers but didn't flinch. The cold had already done its work. Her hands were stiff, her face drawn. But she held her seat on the steps like someone refusing to be moved by anything short of mercy. Inside her bag was a letter, folded, softened, nearly worn blank. Micah Ransom. That was the name. He had land, he wrote. A cabin on the edge of the hills. A quiet life. He needed someone with practical hands and a calm heart. Someone who could read, maybe sing, maybe cook. He made no promises, only offered something close to belonging. She had believed him, and he had not come. On the 4th evening, as the last of the light turned to ash and the wind bit sharper, a figure appeared on the far road. Not another traveler, not a sheriff, not a townsperson. A single rider. Horse and coat, both worn with use. The man didn't hurry. He rode the path like he knew where it ended. He stopped at the foot of the church steps. Iris didn't look up. Her body ached too much for dignity, but she felt the stillness change. He studied her, not with pity, not curiosity, with understanding. And then he spoke. His voice was low and even. Let's go home. No name. No offer of help. Just the words. He turned his horse and started back the way he came. And Iris, tired, frozen, unseen for days, stood. She didn't know why. Only that her body answered before her thoughts did. She picked up her satchel, tucked the letter deep inside, and stepped off the church steps, away from the depot, away from the waiting. The wind chased her briefly. The stone behind her grew colder. But ahead, the man rode at a pace that invited her to walk. So she did. The road unfurled beneath their feet and hooves, a pale ribbon of dust winding between scrub hills and brittle fences long fallen. The town faded quickly behind them, swallowed by a bend in the terrain and the oncoming dusk. He rode quietly, not fast, not distant. A steady presence. The sort that neither led too far ahead nor waited visibly behind. Iris walked in his wake. The chill bit at her legs, but she kept on. Her fingers were stiff around the satchel, her shoulders hunched against the wind. But each step forward felt strangely lighter than those she'd taken in town. Fewer eyes, fewer assumptions. Just the land, the rhythm of his horse, and the long silence that now felt like a kind of grace. She didn't know his name, didn't ask. The trail turned narrow, then widened again. Rocks gave way to dry grass. The world here seemed older, more worn down, but somehow more honest. The hills folded over one another like the backs of sleeping cattle, the sky thinning into slate. As the last of the daylight drained away, a house appeared. It wasn't much. Timbers weathered gray, a sloped roof patched with tin, and a narrow porch that sagged at one corner. But smoke rose from the chimney, and a faint golden light glowed behind the front window. It looked lived in. Not polished, not welcoming. Just real. He dismounted and moved to the rope gate, unlatched it, held it open. Iris stepped through without a word. The porch creaked under her weight, and she paused at the threshold. The door was already swinging open on its hinges, revealing the low flicker of lamplight and the slow pull of warmth. He stepped inside without speaking. She followed. The cabin's heat wasn't much, but it was more than she'd known in days. A fire burned slow in the hearth. A tin kettle hissed quietly nearby. One table, 2 chairs, a shelf of books in one corner, hooks for tools near the back door. Nothing unnecessary. No other voices. He moved with the ease of someone used to silence. Without turning, he poured from the kettle and placed 2 cups on the table. She didn't hesitate this time. She crossed the room, took the cup he offered, and sat. Not across from him, near the hearth, angled to the warmth, as if instinctively claiming the place closest to survival. They drank in silence, not because they had nothing to say, but because nothing needed saying. For now, presence was enough. The fire burned low by the time the cups emptied. No clock ticked in the room. No wind rapped at the window panes. Only the quiet hiss of the hearth and the occasional pop of sap within the logs filled the silence. Iris remained in her chair, blanket now drawn over her lap. She hadn't asked for it. He had simply brought it from a chest by the door and set it beside her without a word. The wool was coarse, but clean, heavy in a way that anchored her. She sat without moving, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. Her shawl still clung to her shoulders like habit. Her satchel rested beneath the chair, untouched. Across from her, the man stirred only to add a log to the fire. Then he sat again, not watching her, not avoiding her, just sharing the room. She'd known many silences in her life, some tense, some cruel, others hollow. But this one felt different, spacious, not empty, but patient. The kind of silence that made room for bruised things to breathe. After a while, he stood, slipped his coat back on, and walked toward the door. She straightened slightly, uncertain. He paused before leaving. "You lock the door when I go," he said, voice low. Then he stepped out into the night. The wind had quieted, but the cold still lay heavy over the land. She heard the barn door creak somewhere beyond the house, followed by the gentle thud of boots and hooves in dry earth. Alone, Iris rose and moved to the door. Her fingers hesitated over the latch, then clicked it shut. The lock turned with a soft finality. She stood there for a moment longer, her hand resting against the wood, then turned back toward the fire. In the corner, a cot had been made, narrow, tidy, layered with woolen quilts. It hadn't been there earlier. She crossed to it slowly, knees still stiff, and sat. No one had told her where to sleep. No gesture, no word. And yet, the bed had waited for her, quietly, without demand or permission. She removed her boots, folded her shawl beside the pillow, and lay down. The fire dimmed behind her. The kettle cooled. The wind returned, brushing gently at the eaves. She didn't cry, didn't reach for the letter, didn't pray. She simply closed her eyes and, for the first time in days, slept without fear. Not soundly. Not yet. But enough. Because the walls held. The man had returned sometime in the night. She hadn't heard him. The door had held. And still, she had slept. And the silence no longer pressed against her like exile. It wrapped around her like rest. Morning didn't rise. It revealed itself. A soft gray seeped in around the window frame, stretching long shadows across the floorboards. Outside, everything glistened faintly with dew and night mist, puddles from meltwater along the path, droplets trembling on the porch rail. a thin mist curling off the hills like breath held too long. Iris lay still, eyes open, listening. The hush of early light held steady, no trains, no chatter, only firelight, and the rhythm of a morning already in motion. She rose quietly. Her body protested with the stiffness of days without rest, but it obeyed. She folded the blanket, smoothed the cot, and placed her satchel neatly at the foot. The door to the outer room was open. She stepped through. He was there, already dressed, already moving, already quiet. A pot hung over the fire. Tin plates rested near a towel. He glanced at her as she entered but said nothing. No morning greeting, no questions, just space. Still being given, still being held. She didn't wait to be asked. Without instruction, she found the basin and washed her hands and face. She rolled her sleeves and pulled flour from a tin near the stove. Her movements were slow, uncertain at first, but once the dough began to form beneath her fingers, the rhythm returned. She cooked in silence. He brewed the coffee, and when the biscuits browned at the edges, he brought plates to the table. They ate side by side, not facing each other. Steam rose between them, the quiet hum of shared breath replacing conversation. He chewed like a man used to solitude. She ate like someone remembering what food meant. When they'd finished, she cleared the dishes and wiped the table clean. She paused with her hand on the rag, then finally asked, "What do you call this place?" He looked at her for a moment. "It don't have a name," he said. His voice was rougher in the morning. Not harsh, just real. She nodded and said nothing more. Later, after the table was cleared, she stepped outside. The sun had begun to push through the clouds, lighting the landscape in thin gold. The hills rolled quiet and open. The earth, still damp from the cool night, smelled alive. A line had been strung between two trees near the shed. Blankets hung there, swaying gently. Not hers. His. She stood still, the wind teasing her shawl, and thought, "This place doesn't ask anything of me." And that, perhaps, was the first kindness it offered. Spring came slowly to Harrow's Crossing. The land thawed in stages, first the shallow soil, then the roots, and finally, grudgingly, the air. Iris learned to tell the time by shadows and the smell of the wind. It no longer carried only dust. Now it held the faint trace of things waking up. She found the garden one morning, half buried behind the shed. Just a patch of fenced-off ground, soil clumped and uneven. Someone had tried to coax life from it once. Old planting rows still showed faintly, like faded lines in a forgotten letter. She didn't ask if she could use it. She just began. By then, the man, whose name she still didn't know, had stopped reacting to her choices. She mended her shawl by the fire. She fetched water from the well. She chopped onions for stew and rinsed dishes in silence. He did not interfere, and when she stooped to dig a new trench for potatoes, he didn't watch. He walked past her with a coil of rope in one hand and a quiet nod. On the third day of digging, her spade struck something solid. It wasn't stone, too smooth, too deliberate. She knelt and cleared away the soil. A box, wooden, plain, weathered by years of damp and heat. The lid stuck slightly when she tried to open it, but finally gave way with a soft creak. Inside, a stack of letters. Some were creased, others folded tightly into corners. A few had been torn open with a hand that had once trembled. One bundle was tied with a fraying red string. Beneath them, wrapped in a cloth, was a photograph. She stared. The man, younger, his face sharper, less weary, and beside him a woman, dark-haired, soft-eyed, a stillness in her posture that mirrored Iris's own. They stood side by side, not touching but close enough to suggest they once knew how. Iris didn't reach for the letters. She didn't need to. She closed the box gently, reburied it, packed the soil smooth. It didn't feel like a secret. It felt like memory. That evening she said little. She served stew. He accepted it. But as they ate in their usual quiet, she glanced at him through the rising steam and said evenly, "You buried something you weren't ready to let go of." He didn't look up right away. When he did, his expression didn't shift. "It wasn't mine to carry anymore," he said simply. And that was the end of it. But the next morning when she went to the kitchen, she found a folded piece of paper tucked inside the tin of flour. No note, just a name. Thomas Whitaker. A quiet offering. His name, finally spoken. The name settled into her chest like a stone dropped in still water. Thomas Whitaker. She said it aloud once, alone in the shed as she folded clean linens, just to feel how it sounded in the air. Not sharp, not heavy. It belonged to the house as much as the walls did. And from that moment forward, something began to change. Not quickly, not dramatically, but in the small spaces between silences. Thomas began to speak more often. Short things, practical things. "Mornin'. Weather'll hold. You need more seed?" They weren't questions of curiosity. They were checks. A way of saying, "I see you," without the risk of being seen too much. And Iris answered. Not because she owed him anything, but because the answers came easily. She learned he rose before dawn, that he repaired fences even when they didn't need it, that he fed the livestock before himself, that he paused at the edge of the porch each evening to look at the horizon, like he was still waiting for something he hadn't named. One afternoon, as she was folding shirts near the fire, she found a button missing from one of his collars. Without a word, she threaded a needle and fixed it. When he returned from the barn and saw it draped neatly over the chair, he paused. Then, quietly, "My mother used to do that." She didn't answer. She just turned back to her stitching. But that night after supper she made tea. Poured 2 cups instead of 1. Set them both on the table and waited. He joined her. Neither of them spoke. They drank. Then, as the fire settled and the room dimmed to lamplight, she said, half to herself, "It's quieter here than I expected." He didn't respond right away. Then softly, "You get used to it." And that's when she saw it. The corner of his mouth lifted. Not much, barely noticeable, but it was there. A real smile. The kind that hadn't been worn in a long time. Not forced, not polite, just honest. Iris looked down at her cup, fighting the instinct to smile back too soon. Instead, she breathed in the steam. Let it warm her, let it hold. Because something had shifted, not loudly, not permanently, but enough. The house, once a shelter, had started to feel like something more. A place of choosing, not just survival. The letter had never left her satchel. It traveled with her from train to church steps, from the cot to the kitchen table. Folded and refolded, its creases softened into wear, its ink barely visible in some places. But she hadn't looked at it since the day she arrived. Until now. The morning had broken clear and bright. A rare warmth hung in the breeze, thin but honest. Thomas had gone into town, something about a fence post order delayed, and Iris found herself alone in the cabin for the first time since she'd entered it. She moved through the room slowly, touching the edge of the window pane, the notch worn into the table leg, the polished wood of the doorframe. The quiet inside was different now, less like a vacuum, more like an exhale. When she reached for the satchel, her hand didn't tremble. She pulled the letter out. Micah Ransom. The man who had promised a home, a role, a place. The man who had written in neat penmanship and careful lines. The man who had not arrived. She read it again. All of it. The tone was formal, measured, earnest. He needed a woman of strength, he had said. Someone who would not break in the wild. Someone who could plant and sow and mend and listen. Iris read the words in silence, then folded it one last time. By noon, she had written her reply. She sat at Thomas's table, pen in hand, a scrap of paper smoothed flat, the fire soft behind her. She wrote, "Dear Mr. Ransom, thank you for your letter. It found me at the right time, though not the right place. I came with faith. I waited with patience. And what I found without your help. There is a man here, one who says little and promises less, but keeps what he offers. I do not need a husband made of paper. I need someone whose silence makes space, not distance. I hope you are well. I hope you find what you were looking for. But I will not be writing again. Iris Holloway." She folded the reply, placed it in the envelope where his had once lived. Then she walked outside. The sky stretched wide and empty. A hawk wheeled above the hills. The garden plot waited behind her, already showing signs of life. She struck a match, held the flame to the corner of the envelope. The paper curled black, then orange, then ash. She let it drop onto the rocks, where the wind scattered what remained. That evening, when Thomas returned, he didn't ask what had changed. But as they stood on the porch after supper, she reached for the teapot before he could. "You sit," she said. "I'll pour tonight." And when she handed him the cup, he took it without a word. But this time, he smiled with both corners of his mouth. Weeks passed, quiet and steady, as if the land had exhaled and finally decided to keep her. Iris stopped counting the days. She no longer startled at the sound of boots on the porch, no longer reached for the satchel out of habit. It sat tucked in a corner now, folded closed, like a part of a chapter no longer being read. The mornings began with soft chores and warm light, coffee in mismatched tin mugs, the smell of bread baking, the garden pushing through the soil, row by row. The world here wasn't easy, but it moved at a pace that allowed her to meet it without fear. One morning, Thomas pointed out where a fence needed mending near the orchard. She went with him. They worked in tandem. He drove the posts. She tied the wire. Neither of them spoke much, but there was rhythm in the quiet, trust shaped like repetition. At one point, while resting beneath the shade of a cottonwood, he turned toward her. "This place never had a name," he said. She wiped her brow with the hem of her sleeve. "Seems a shame," she murmured. "Land this wide ought to be called something." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched the wind move across the field. It rolled like a tide, soft, certain. Then he said quietly, "Holloway." She looked at him, startled, then still. "That's your name," he added. "But it fits the land now, too." She didn't speak, just held his gaze a moment longer. And in that silence, something deepened. That evening, without ceremony, he carved the word into a plank of pine and hung it above the door. He didn't tell her he was going to do it. But when she stepped onto the porch just after sunset and saw the letters there, simple, unpainted, carved with care, she didn't cry. She just reached up, touched the wood. Let her fingers rest there. A name not taken. A name given.